Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Madison. I'm the Collections and Education Manager here at the museum. So I put together our speaker series for the year. This is our last speaker series, so it's going to be a good one. One thing that I'd like to point out, at the museum, it's sort of the unofficial year of the hood ornaments. There's just so much going on surrounding them this year. As you probably saw throughout the showroom, we have all these displays of hood ornaments from a man named John Zoller. It's probably one of the most complete collections that I've seen so far. And then this year's ACDA Festival poster has a hood ornament featured on it for the very first time ever. So when we were thinking about our speaker series, we were thinking about hood ornaments. And of course, I knew very well of Steve. So Steve Purdy from Michigan is going to get up and talk about his newest book. He's published 4, but this one's his newest. It is Mascots in Motion. And Steve is a member of the Society of Automotive Historians. And for the last 40 years, he's been photographing classic and collector cars. So we're all very excited to hear about his books and some of the hood ornaments he's been able to document. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Steve Purdy.
Well, thanks for that introduction. I just love being down here at the ACDA Museum. I've respected it so deeply for so many years. And kind of a side benefit was, when I'm out doing these lectures kind of all over the Midwest, essentially, I often run into people that I have known before and hadn't connected with in years. And I've got a wonderful example today. I want to introduce you to Walt Sorg and his wife, Megan, local people here who Walt and I have done so many projects over the years. We published a newsletter for the municipal bond people. We did 2 radio shows together. Walt established a web-based radio network in Lansing, and I had a weekly show on his network. It was such fun to do those things. But boy, did I hate having those deadlines every week.
Boy, did we lose money.
Oh yes, it didn't last long. But then I did another one afterwards on another network that didn't. Well, that network is still out there, but during the pandemic, I just opted out of that having deadlines. I just didn't want any deadlines anymore. So anyway, yes, I'm an automotive journalist from the Lansing area. I've been doing writing and photography and all that kind of thing about classic and collector car things and racing and rallying and all that kind of stuff for probably about 40 years, a little over 40 years. In the beginning, kind of a part-time basis, I was kind of a hanger-on in the automotive business. So I did product reviews and I did a lot of different things. But then when I folded the tent, and then my day job employer offered an early out. And boy, at 54 years old, I was ready to raise my hand and be out the back door and haven't looked back. So anyway, that's when I began to do automotive journalism full time and more seriously. And I had a lot of projects over the years. I was a freelancer. But a little over 2 years ago now, I finally folded the tent on a big project that I had been doing and found myself with the time and the resources to actually publish the book that I've been wanting to publish for so many years, to feature the photography that I was so happy with, that gave me such pleasure, and to leave sort of a legacy. So when I decided to pull the trigger on the project, I knew I wanted it to be an art book. So I found a company in Grand Rapids, M.J. Jacobs Company, who they don't publish books. The difference, by the way, between publishing and producing a book is that a publisher manages the marketing. A publisher sells the book as well as manages everything else. Well, with a book with this small a niche, I knew I was going to have to self-publish, but I found the guy in Grand Rapids who does art books. And, I get credit for the words and the pictures and kind of the general concept, but that company gets credit for that beautiful presentation in an art book form. It's in the back of the room. My assistant, Vanna White, is back there to take your money and sell books when you're ready. They all get personally inscribed. Even if you order them on the website, you can get them on the website as well. So anyway, Mascots in Motion is what it's called. It started out to be mostly hood ornaments because I'd shot hood ornaments so tenaciously for so many years. And as I began to sort the images, I realized that there was a lot more than just hood ornaments that made for beautiful pictures, side mounts and reflections and grills and just anything that caught my eye is what I get. And I often get teased that when they look at my photographs, they never see a whole car because I'm always focusing in on the details of the thing. So anyway, Mascots in Motion. And I do business as Shunpiker Productions. My radio program was Shunpiker's Journal. And both of them are called that same thing. A shunpiker, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is one who shuns the turnpike, takes the back road instead of the highway. Now, not everything I do is on the back roads, but that's kind of a good philosophy of life to live by, I think. And let's see, we're missing. Oh, there it is. There it is. So one of the first images I shot that I thought was worthy of matting and framing really big was this Amber Chieftain, a Pontiac, 51 Pontiac I found at the Concours d'Elegance at Meadowbrook in I'm going to say early 80s sometime. But with a 200 millimeter lens on the camera that I had inherited, and I didn't really know what it could do, when I looked at an image like this, something that caught my eye like this, and zoomed in on it with that 200 millimeter lens, look how the background is blurred, and you can see right through the face of that Pontiac. You can see how that old bakelite is aging and so forth. So that caught my eye. Though that one still hangs on my wall in, I think, 18 by 22, and still looks spectacular. But and when, of course, I was beginning to shoot cars, I was shooting film, and every time you pulled the trigger, it was $1. Between buying the film and getting it processed, you had to wait a few days, and gosh, that didn't deter me. I'd go to one of these car shows and shoot 200 frames, 300, 400 frames. And I was a late adopter to digital, but of course I converted, as everybody has to. But I found that was just as good a process if you were just managing the composition well. So I begin the book with a little discussion of Art Deco, because most of the best automotive design details were during the Art Deco era, from about 1915 to early into the 50s. Art Deco had ceased to be a thing earlier than that, but its influence remained right into the 50s, early 50s, when other images took over. So we discussed that in the beginning of the book. And then, we're getting slow. Did you see that? Oh, there. It stutters for some reason. But the first application of hood ornaments essentially was triggered by the Boyce Motometer Company in Long Island, New York. They invented a little thing that was both a radiator cap and a temperature gauge. So a guy sitting behind the wheel of the car could see how hot his engine was getting. Well, it wasn't long before manufacturers decided they'd put their emblem on it or their logo on it, and it just grew from being just a temperature gauge to being an ornament. And Packard, boy, this thing stutters badly. So here's what Packard did with theirs. They took their hood ornament and attached it to the motor meter, and look at that. Isn't that a cool thing? So the next chapter talks about Lalique. You know Lalique? Lalique is a famous French crystal making company, art company. They make art glass of all kinds and still do today, and still reproduce some of these hood ornaments today. But René Lalique in 1900 was about 50 years old, and he was a respected artist in Paris. And he had begun to experiment with glass for the first time, and then crystal and so forth. Well, in 15, the most notorious race in Italy, the Targa Florio, if some of you heard of the Targa Florio, they hired him to make a crystal trophy for the winner of the Targa Florio. And that started him thinking about the automotive realm. He did a lot more trophies for races and rallies and challenges of one kind or another, but he also decided in the early 20s to produce hood ornaments for these luxury cars, like the Duesenberg and others. At that time, it would have been the French classics that he was working on, and the Brits and all the Europeans. So he made these wonderful crystal hood ornaments. I think Chris's is my favorite, because I used to call her the reclining nude. Here she is again. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's the cockerel. Oh, here she is. Here she is again. And, I photographed her in all kinds of light and from every different angle you can think of. And gosh, even now, only half of them are really keepers. So then we go on to the Brits. The Brits probably had, of the Europeans, more hood ornaments and filigree and interesting design details than anybody because so they get their own chapter. That's why they get their own chapter in addition to the continental Europeans. Rolls-Royce, for example, where'd they? Oh, there. Oh, there she is. I don't know what's happening with this computer here. So the lady you see here on the hood of a Rolls-Royce, they called the Spirit of Ecstasy. Her real name was Eleanor Velasco Thornton, and she was the mistress, well, not the mistress, she was the paramour, which is different than a mistress, not a mistress, but a paramour of Lord John Montagu, who was probably the central mover and shaker in early automobile history in England. He was a member of Parliament, and he started the first magazine for the enthusiasm of automobiles. He was a tireless promoter of roads and a serious competitor in motorsports events throughout Europe. John Montagu, Lord Montagu. She was his paramour, and she was also his right-hand man at the magazine, essentially. Well, a friend of mine and I, Maureen McDonald, who's a semi-retired automotive journalist from Detroit, she got the idea of doing a historical fiction novel about Eleanor Thornton because she was right in the middle of all of these powerful, rich gentlemen in England in the early days of the automobile. She was friends with Mr. Rolls and Royce. She was, the founding of the Automobile Club, who she first worked for. I mean, she was right in the middle of all of this until in 1915, she and Lord Montagu were crossing the Mediterranean on their way to the Middle East. He was going to India to be the Crown's representative on some transportation project in India. She was going to go as far as the Middle East and turn around and come back and run the magazine while he was gone. Well, Lord Montagu's wife knew of her, respected her, and encouraged her to go along just to help him out. They were friends, actually. But as they passed Crete, their pleasure boat was sunk by a German U-boat. This was the beginning of World War I. And she perished, and he survived. But after 3 days on an upside-down lifeboat that was about to sink when they finally rescued him, but in his memoirs, 20 years later, he wrote the scene of them grasping onto each other, headed for the lifeboat, which they had very little hope of actually getting onto, when a big wave ripped her out of his arms and into the sea, just kind of like the Titanic ending. So what better subject for a historical novel, don't you think? But so I've done the first part of that, and it's in her hands now. And I'm not very good at writing fiction, nor am I good at making up conflict that could lead to fiction. So I don't know if we'll continue with that one. A couple other books in the process I'll tell you about later. So anyway, the Spirit of Ecstasy, she is great. The midge you've seen on MGs, isn't it interesting that they would pick a mosquito-like critter that doesn't bite, but it's just pesky as hell, to be a representative for the brand? Well, the story isn't that simple, and it's in the book too. Oh, here, I'm missing something. These things, every time I advance, I get a blank screen until I back up and advance again. Oh, here's a good one. And in the north of England, there is an organization called the Ancient Order of Froth Blowers. And in the book, I quote the organization's bylaws and mission statement, which is all about blowing the froth off your neighbor's beer without cruel intent and being friends with them and all that kind of stuff. And they got together to drink beer and raise money for this, one of their members' playgrounds for kids or something like that. And the local teetotalers gave them a hard time and said that they were the problem in the first place. If they weren't drinking, these little kids wouldn't need all this help. And so the bylaws are just a hoot to read. So you'll have to buy the book to get that one. Okay, see, every time I advance, there we go. Okay. So one of the things that always catches my eye is reflections of one kind or another. And one of my favorite places to shoot is Amelia Island. How many have been to Amelia Island for the Concours d'Elegance down there? It's probably the second most prestigious in the country and has been since its founding many years ago. But look at the reflections in the hood of that sunbeam. I just love that kind of stuff. So then we go on to the continental Europeans. Here's one from a Delahaye. You know, the French are often derogatorily called frog eaters, because they love frog legs, and so the Brits used to tease them with that. So somebody put on his Delahaye a frog hood ornament. I think Delahaye provided that hood ornament, but I couldn't really find all the details. A guy named Bazin made a lot of the European ones. He was a sculptor, famous sculptor, and he'd be hired by a car company to make different hood ornaments. I wasn't able to find her origin, and I've got a pretty good library of resource material too, and researched at the Gilmore and every place else, but I couldn't find anything on her. Minerva was a Greek goddess of war, basically, and her story is in there. Hers is a fascinating story. She was said to have been born full size, alive, and ready for war, with a fierce look on her face, basically. And she was not only the goddess of war, but she was a patron of soldiers. And I know she had a bunch of other constituencies as well, but her story's in the book too. But I put this one in here because I wanted to show you that light. Look at the golden light on her. I think I might have gotten this one on Amelia, but I'm not real sure. But for Art Prize in Grand Rapids, if you've ever been to Art Prize, it's a kind of a world-class art competition. I did a display for the Veterans Memorial Park where they wanted something that was related to soldiers or military in some sense. So I did her in 38 inches by 42 inches for the display up there, printed on metal. Boy, is that spectacular. Minerva and her history is so fun. Evian Voisin is another of those, like the Duesenberg, where the designer had very little material to work with and no budget at all, went into the shop and hammered together something very simple with just simple plates of metal, making a raptor out of just the most simple parts. That's the way the Duesenberg on Duesenberg came to be. Gordon Berrig, who had only worked for Auburn Cord Duesenberg for a short time, he was sent out to make a hood ornament for the Duesenberg that would be classy enough and sturdy enough and project a good image, and he came up with something very similar. I'll show you in a later slide here. So General Motors, it gets a big chapter of its own, and I do the General Motors one kind of in order of the way the divisions became part of General Motors. Durant started with Buick and went on to the others, but I wanted to show you this. Gosh, this stutter is killing me here. Just a second here. There. That was the next one. So we're talking about Amelia Island. The RM Auction Company has a huge auction down there. And they have this big outside tent, probably room for 30, 40 cars in there. And it has skylights. And the skylights let light through on the hoods of these cars, Jaguars and other things with beautiful lines. And here's a Buick with the skylights lighting up that image. That's another kind of thing that catches my eye. Here's the famous Y Job, the first concept car in the automobile industry. Harley Earl made it for himself in 1938, paraded it around at the car shows, and that was his daily driver as well. Blue on blue. Here's another one from Amelia Island. By the way, you see that building on the kind of the side of that image, and the morning light coming across the palm trees, and that's Amelia Island on the ocean side of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. The Ritz-Carlton, beautiful hotel, has hosted its entire life. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the Ritz-Carlton Company, they have resorts and hotels and conference centers all over the world, and almost all of them have a water feature of some kind, a stream or a pond or a little lake or something. And so the executives decided that they should have a special breed of ducks to populate those ponds and be very distinctive and recognized immediately as something from the Ritz-Carlton conglomerate. So they hired a biologist, an avian biologist, to develop a special breed of colorful ducks, and now you can see them all over the world in these Ritz-Carlton hotels. And you know what they called them? Ritz Quackers. I can't resist that one. Sorry. Blue on blue on blue. This was at the Oldsmobile Centennial. Another thing that makes for an artsy photograph, I think, is being bichromatic. Just one color, maybe two colors, maybe shades of the same color, but that's why this image caught my eye. Blue on blue on blue. So here's another little, one of my favorite spots to shoot old cars is a junkyard. Don't we just love rusty old cars? There's a guy in Middle Tennessee. Kathy and I discovered his little collection on a previous trip to Tennessee to the Cumberland Plateau. Go by this guy. He had a fenced area in his front yard, essentially, big front yard, with maybe 40 cars, just all of them from the 50s, and all of them just rusting away. But there were Buicks and Pontiacs and Cadillacs and everything you could possibly imagine in their 50s cars. Well, I photographed it, and I got some pretty good pictures back in the days of film. But then we rediscovered it when I was down there with another friend of mine a couple of years ago, before I did the book, basically, and rediscovered that old junkyard. And the old guy that owned it was in his 90s. He couldn't come out of the house to greet me. But his son or grandson, I think it was out there in the yard tending to stuff. And I asked him if I could stop and shoot those cars again. He had to open a gate to let me in. He said, yeah, you can have 20 minutes. 20 minutes, you can have 20 minutes. He left me in there for 45. But my pal was chatting with him while I was shooting these cars. And the guy collects only cars from the 50s. So I shot all these cars, and as I was leaving, I asked the son-in-law, or the grandson, I said, does he have any more of these cars out back there in that woods or anything? He said, God, that woods is full of old cars. My eyes lit up, of course, and I said, oh, can I go back and shoot those? He says, no, we don't let anybody back there because there's a herd of wild boar that patrol that back there, and they are aggressive. So I thought, well, maybe my next trip, I'll take a rifle squad out there with me and a few dogs, and I'll shoot those cars. Wouldn't that be fun? But yeah, he had just 50 cars, raised his whole family running a salvage yard on just 50 cars. Here's the beginning of Chevrolet. This is the first Chevrolet. Now, people think this is a bust of Louis Chevrolet, the race car driver who started Chevrolet, or who lent his name and his skills and his reputation to the GM folks to start Chevrolet. But experts tell me this is not really him. It's just kind of a generic, what do you call it? Yeah, generic. Anyway. So Chevrolet had an Eagle. We just saw, what was it out in the parking lot? I think it was an Auburn or something with a kind of a Raptor hood ornament. This is Chevrolet's version of it. It didn't last long. It was a premium issue, or a premium for a Chevy. This I shot at the Hershey meet last year. Gosh, that's another one of those that I didn't think I was going to get anything good until I saw that I could make that bichromatic. I could crop that down. There was other stuff in this picture, but I could crop it down just to the blues and the reds and a little silver. So that's why it caught an artist's eye. Cadillac V16. Oh, in the book, I like to say that everything's shot in the wild. I didn't use any flash, any indoor photography, any studio photography. I didn't control any light. I didn't go looking for any particular car. These are just things that caught my eye over the years. But this is one of the exceptions. When General Motors was moving the Cadillac collection from downtown in the old Cadillac Museum and the old factory out to the Heritage Center in the suburbs, this was, 25 years ago, I bet. I was still shooting film then, or maybe 30 years ago, I don't know. But they had them housed in a warehouse out in Sterling Heights, and I talked my way in the back door, me and another photographer, and we shot in there at our leisure. And I didn't use a flash. I just used that long lens, and I don't know how I got these kind of images, but I got a bunch of them in there that really turned out nice. And I'll show you another one. Here's the one I used for my Christmas cards for a number of years. Their Christmas tree was behind that Cadillac, and it looked like those Christmas bells are hanging from the Cadillac there. So here's LaSalle, very detailed, probably made by the Turnstedt division, and I'll tell you about them in just a second. Oops, let's see. This is another LaSalle. LaSalle went to this more modern theme just after they started. I think they only had 2 wood ornaments in all their time. Here's the Oakland version of a Raptor. Raptors are very common, hawks, birds of prey, because of their aggressiveness and grace. Okay, and here's Chief Pontiac. Pontiac came out. General Motors bought Oakland Car Company because they wanted a cheap car to compete with the Model T. And the Oakland did a pretty good job of it, but then they wanted something even a little more accessible, so they started the Pontiac, which was going to be a cheap version of the Oakland. Well, the Pontiac sold like hotcakes, And the Oakland just kind of waned. So Oakland went away, and we had Pontiac for many years to come. And Pontiac is one of those companies that had so many versions of the same theme. In this case, the bust of Chief Pontiac, an Indian head, Native American head, over the years, and they interpreted it so differently. This one I think is from about 39 or something, 30 earlier than that. But look at the water on him. Tell you another little story. I'm going to run out of, I got my time up here. Sometimes I get off on these little side stories and I can't quit, so I have to hurry up at the end. So I'm at the Eyes on Design show at the Eleanor and Edsel Ford Mansion in Grosse Pointe Shores, right on the shore of Lake St. Clair. And I cover that every year. I get down there at 7 o'clock in the morning when they're bringing the cars in, because I can get that soft morning light and I can get at the cars without somebody in the way. And so I get down there early. Well, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. I got down there 7 o'clock, and it was just really misty. It was the cloud was so heavy, you couldn't tell if it was rain or mist or anything. And that made for some really nice light, of course. And then as the morning progressed, the light came up a little bit, and the rain got heavier and heavier. By the time they opened the gates at 10 o'clock for people to come in, there were a lot of people that showed up in spite of the rain, and these guys are streaming in as I'm streaming out. I got all the pictures I need by the time the public comes in. And the guy says to me, he said, "God, what a terrible day for a car show." I said, "I'm a photographer. It's a wonderful day for a car show, because look at what I get on a day like that." Oh, such drama. Fire in his eye. Marshall 50s Festival. They used to do a 50s Festival there. They had a car show afterwards in the county fairgrounds. Right about dusk. I got that long lens on. I'm bobbing around trying to get a picture of that hood ornament. And there's a car in the background and a tree, and I'm trying to get just the right position, and his eye lit up. And it was the sunset. It wasn't the red Pontiac part of the car. The sun was setting over my shoulder, and I caught it in his eye. So I call that one fire in his eye. Another Pontiac chieftain. This is how they interpreted it in the early 1950s. See how he's almost got wings? This one lit up from the inside. This is obviously a reproduction. The originals were made of Bakelite, and they checked and weathered really interestingly, but not cleanly. This is some modern plastic, but it's true to its design. I mentioned the Turnstedt division. One of the hardest things to do was to find out who gets credit for the design of some of these beautiful sculptures that we see there. And there was very seldom any one designer that I could find that would get credit for any particular design, maybe a half a dozen, handful. Well, the Turnstedt division, which was a company, or the Turnstedt Company, was a company formed in the teens to do trim for automobiles, door handles and trim strips and all kinds of little trim pieces, and they also hood ornaments. But they not only did the production, but they did the design as well. And they had a whole cadre of designers. The first woman who did full-time auto designing was Bonnie Lim, who was one of the main designers at Turnstedt Division in Detroit. And she gets credit for so many of these, but I bet there's so many more out there that she actually did, but didn't get credit for. I'll tell you the story of her design of the Pierce Arrow if I have time a little later. Okay, Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford did not like filigree. He was a curmudgeon. He didn't care a lick for the ornamentation of anything. But he finally agreed, with some pushing from his son Edsel, who was really the Steed of the family, to have this partridge on the Model A, offered on the Model A. But it was because Henry Ford was a partridge hunter. He still didn't care about the filigree, but he liked that partridge. So he agreed to that one. Ford didn't have a lot of really interesting, well, other than this one. Oh, wow, look at this. This is one of the best ones Ford ever produced. First on the Lincoln, and then it became an option on Fords in the mid to late 50s. A graceful a greyhound dog in full stride. Love the aesthetics of that. Okay, Lincoln Premier. Yeah, that was the early 50s. See, he's got wings, and he's a knight of some kind. I always thought this one was just totally incongruous. I didn't know what they were after there. One of those, but one of the famous automotive artists, one of the most famous of all time, said that the sign of really good art is you got to leave the viewer with something to figure out, basically. You don't want to tell them the whole story. You want to tease them. So, another rainy shot. This was at the Ford Centennial celebration. It rained the second day when I was there. Got some really good shots. Mercury Sports. I had very few. They had some nice trim like this. Oops. Like this. But they didn't have many hood ornaments. That was the only one. Chrysler, on the other hand, had a lot of really nice stuff. Look at that. The Gazelle. This was in the early 30s, I think only on the Imperial. I think that was the only Chrysler that got the Gazelle. Oh, geez. What grace and beauty. And here is, now the junkyard up north of Lansing on US 127. There's a guy just not too far off the highway. Bought a junkyard. He was a young guy when I ran into him, and 15 years ago. He was a relatively young guy, and he bought this junkyard, and he was making a living off it, and he had 3 or 4 employees. But when he bought the junkyard, of course, junkyards have to have some visual barrier with the rest of society. So rather than build a fence, he built a berm. He just brought in a grader, and he built about a, 20-foot berm. And he set the remaining old cars that were in that junkyard. There was only a dozen of them or so. Took all the old cars and sat them right up on the ridge of that berm. So, of course, that caught my eye, and I pulled over. I went in, and I said, "Hey, man, would you mind if I'd go up and shoot those cars up there?" And he just hesitated a minute. I said, "Go ahead." I expected him to say, "Oh, insurance wouldn't let us." And it was spring. There was snow on the ground still. And he said, "Yeah, go help yourself." So I got this one up there on top of that berm, along with a lot of other really interesting ones. This is Amelia Island again. Oh, look at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. And another thing about shooting at Amelia and at Eyes on Design, where you've got Lake St. Clair beside you, there seems to be an effect when you've got a large body of water anywhere nearby. You don't have to see the water, but if you've got a large body of water nearby, it will somehow soften the light as you're taking pictures like this. And so that's one of the reasons I love Amelia Island. La Comtesse. Chrysler in 1953 built a concept car called La Comtesse, which later became in 55 and 6 the La Femme, which was one of the few cars that was entirely designed and trimmed for a woman. It had a place to hang your purse. It had a little makeup compartment. It came in pink and salmony pink and a soft color. Oh gosh, it's beautiful. And this was the hood ornament from their concept car. I did a story on that I don't think I ever got that one published though. Plymouth is the other one that had a theme, but lots of interpretations. In Plymouth's case, it was a sailboat. Here's an interpretation. There's an interpretation. Right into the 50s, it was still a sailboat, but it got more and more abstract. Oop. DeSoto, on the other hand, look at the classic DeSoto. This is from the late 40s or early 50s. You could get her in glass, crystal, and it wouldn't be crystal. I don't know what kind of glass they used. It wouldn't be Bakelite, but some kind of plastic from the late 40s. Or you could get her in chrome. Look at that. Isn't she graceful? Goddesses are probably the most common theme to design hood ornaments around. So here we are at the Auburn Cord Duesenberg. The final big chapter is on American independence, and I'm going to kind of speed through those a little bit. But I have to push the button twice because I have to advance to the dark screen, back, and then forward again. So here's the Duesenberg I told you about that Gordon Buehring hammered together on the workbench in the back room here. Abstracts. Look at that for a second and see if you can kind of visualize what that is as I tell you what it is. The bar across the bottom is the chrome bar that locates the headlights on a Duesenberg. Headlight at each end. The vertical are the slats in the grill. Some curve one way, some curve the opposite way. One of the worst things for a guy that's shooting cars is a bright sunny day. You don't like that glare and that harsh light. But when the bright sunlight hits that bar and reflects up onto those grill slats, look at the pattern you get. That's the kind of abstracts that catch my eye. Yes, they're flexible. Yes, and this was taken one year. The Meadowbrook concours in suburban Detroit. Ed Lucas who used to be the research director here, I think. Anyway, he assembled the largest group of Duesenbergs ever in one place at one time for that show that year, and that's where I took that picture. On the right, there's a red car. That's the red reflection you see in that. And on the left was either another color car or that's just the grass, I think. So yeah, anyway, I love those. There's lots of abstracts in the book if you like that kind of art. Pierce Arrow. This is the one they designed for the first Pierce Arrow, very representational. They wanted something more classy. So their design director designed this archer, drawer of the bow, they say in French. I don't know the French pronunciation here. and Bonnie Lim. It came 1930. They liked this hood ornament, and that was pretty popular, but they wanted something a little more modern, a little more artsy. So they went to Turnstad Division. Bonnie Lim got the assignment to do a new version of this, and there's what she came up with. And in order to do that, she enlisted the help of the janitor, who took off his shirt for her and posed in that thing. But before he did that, she sent him to someplace to learn what the proper posture was for drawing the bow. So she used her shirtless janitor boy for that image. Bonnie Lim. Okay, there's our donut chaser again, the one that you saw attached to the motometer in the earlier chapter. Pelican or cormorant? Which does this look like, a pelican or a cormorant? It's what? Well, the Packard family thought it should be called a pelican. In fact, when it was first used, they insisted on calling it a pelican. But everybody said it looks like a cormorant. And of course, even today, the newspaper or the newsletter is called the Cormorant. But they did that because on the Packard family crest, it has pelicans. And so they expected that to be a pelican, and they wouldn't give up on that. Interesting story. The slider, here's the Adonis. Oh, real classic. Packard had a lot of different ones and a lot of really nice ones. There's a side mount. I've got a couple pages of side mounts just because they're so Art Deco, some of them. I'm going to have to hurry here a little bit. Here's another of my favorites. A guy that was the most famous pinup artist of his day in the 1930s. What was his name? George Petty. You would know his art mostly from the fuselage of World War II fighter planes. He's the one that did those nudie drawing, basic half-nude drawings on planes. Well, after the war, he was pretty famous, and Nash wanted him to do a graceful, sensuous hood ornament, and that's what he came up with, the Nash Babe. She was made in this iteration. I don't think they have the other. No, I don't have the other iteration. But they redesigned it in the 50s to make it more modern, and it just spoiled it, I thought. But what a great story. Thaddeus Arbuckle's McFarlane had this atlas. Only company to ever use any image like that, as far as I know. Hupmobile. Who can tell me who's seated in seat 6C? You can almost see through the windows of that thing. The Hudson Raptor. There's another Raptor. Graceful, beautiful, 30s. Here's what she looks like reproduced. Here's what she looks like in her natural state, all pitted. Yeah, gives her a nice texture. Hudson Terraplane, Stutz Goddess. And here, I got to the very end, and I had a few pages yet to finish, and my designer said, I'm going to do another half dozen pages or so. And so I decided to do one on trucks. And so I've got the Bulldog and other common trucks. But who knows what a Divco is? You know the Divco? Yeah, milk truck. It's those little humpy trucks, stand-up driver, basically, delivering bread or delivering milk or whatever it is. Detroit Industrial Vehicle Company is what Divco stands for. But look at the cute little Art Deco hood ornament they had. So then I decided to finish the book. The last image in the book, in the truck chapter, is one that I thought I wanted to end with a little whimsy. So here's a homemade hood ornament I found at a car show in Jackson. Now, many years ago now. Somebody just welded that crowbar on the hood. So there you have it. My mission here was to kind of introduce you to the concept of this kind of design detail as a subgenre of automotive art. And that was the purpose of this book, is to present these kind of images for their aesthetic value. So now you know. And let me leave you with just a tidbit of wisdom I learned some years ago. Some wise man once said, always live your life to be the kind of person your dog thinks you are. So anyway. So we've got time for a little Q&A. Anybody got any questions? Here's one.
What was the name of that town that you referenced in the...
Oh, it's about 25 miles north of Cookville. It's on old US 127. It's just south of Middlevale or Middleton or Middle something. A little south of there, but about 25 miles north of, and it's about, if you know the geography there, the Cumberland Plateau kind of flattens down at Crossville and then west. So this is the first main town west of Crossville. So yeah, drive by there sometime. I can't imagine the old man would still be alive. And I asked the kid, I said, well, what are you going to do with all this stuff when he's gone? He says, we're just going to keep it as kind of a memorial to him. So whether he'll let people in there to shoot cars or shoot his pigs, I don't know. So, any other questions? Here's one.
What's your favorite one? Sounds like you really like the Plymouth Greyhound.
The Chrysler or the Ford, the Lincoln Greyhound. Yeah, I like the Greyhound. I like those really classic, graceful animal ones. But it's like asking you who's your favorite kid. Or like I was telling somebody in the parking lot, or asking me to giving me $100,000 for my pocket, sending me out to the RM auction, saying buy whatever car you want. I would be so overwhelmed because I like so many of them. I just couldn't decide. But probably the one with the most poignant story is that Rolls-Royce foot ornament, the Spirit of Ecstasy, and the story behind it with Eleanor Thornton. I think that's probably the most significant one of the bunch. Yes. Oh. Well, it's different. Probably the most important book on hood ornaments, there's a series of two of them, they're about $250 a piece, is by Michael Furman, who has, if you know automotive photography, he's the guy that does this fabulous studio photography of classic cars, the whole car or a fender or just the graceful bichromatic images of those. And he does all of his in the studio. He lights it carefully so you can see every angle, and he very carefully composes it. Mine are not that. I wouldn't have the patience for that. I never wanted to learn the technology of the camera or the lighting, or I never wanted to learn any of that. I'm just a guy who sees something that I think is beautiful, and I focus in on that, and I take a snapshot. I'm a snapshot kind of guy, more than a professional photographer, than a commercial photographer. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's good. Anything else? So, oh yes, one more.
Do you like them at all? Or just photograph?
Well, I just photograph them. I've got a couple of pieces of memory. I've got a brass 1912 Cadillac hubcap. I've got a few little tidbits, but no, I don't collect hood ornaments. They cost a lot of money. If you got an original, if you want to be a serious collector of those, and I don't have that. But it's like it's like the rest of my automotive life. I'm a journalist. I get to play with other people's cars. I don't need to own them myself. In fact, if I don't own them myself, I don't have to change their oil or store them anywhere or polish them or dust them or anything. I do have a collection of probably 40, 50 cars, but they're all 1/18 scale metal models, and that suits me just fine. I can put on my gloves and I can dust them every once in a while and feel their contours and really enjoy them. So yeah, that's the kind of collector I am. But yeah, anything else? Yeah.
What got you into photographing hood ornaments?
Well, I tell the story in the introduction to the book, and I'll be real brief about it here. My late younger brother was a Can-Am racer, and he died in a highway accident, and I inherited his camera, which he had just bought. And this was in 1968, by the way. So it was a Canon FTB 35 millimeter, and it had a 200 millimeter lens, fixed focal length lens. And I had taken pictures before and kind of enjoyed them, and I loved cars. I loved the cars since I was a kid. First fell in love with an Iso Grifo A30. But so when I went to the first Concours d'Elegance at Meadowbrook, I'm looking at these cars, like I told you the story about that Pontiac hood ornament, the first really good one. And I'm looking at these cars through that 200 millimeter lens, and it's compressing those images. It's blurring the background, and it's making them look like art to me. So that's where I was drawn in, to the details particularly. Now, since, I love other details. I love blossoms. I love close-ups of faces, little kids or animals. I love see the eyes and that kind of stuff. In fact, I just got if you go to Art Prize in Grand Rapids, you'll see my display this year is called Rest in Peace, the Art and Wisdom of the Graveyard. And it's pictures of the sculptures on gravestones, close-ups of them, and including on each side, there's an epitaph. And if you're hanging out in graveyards, an epitaph is a thing you're looking for. If you find one of those you can read, it's a real treat. So anyway, yeah, so I was drawn in by that long lens to make that short. Yeah. And an interest in cars. Anything else? Vanna White's back at the table there. I'll sign a book for you. You personalize it to you or somebody you want to give it to as a gift. Otherwise, there's also cards back there. You can order it online at shunpikerproductions.com. You're welcome.